On March 12, 1998, a retired fingerprint expert named A. Nathan Darby sat in his Austin home examining two sets of prints through a magnifying glass. One was a copy of an unknown fingerprint lifted from a cardboard box on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository on November 22, 1963, the day President Kennedy was assassinated. The other was a fingerprint card from 1951, submitted to him blindly. Darby didn't know whose prints he was examining. That was the point. After hours of careful analysis, Darby signed a sworn, notarized affidavit he had found a 14-point match. In U.S. law, 12 points are sufficient for legal identification. This was more conclusive than the minimum standard. The fingerprint belonged to Malcolm Wallace. Mac Wallace, a convicted murderer, a man who worked for Lyndon Johnson. If you want to understand how a killer's fingerprint ended up at the scene of the most infamous assassination in American history, hit that like button. It helps us share stories the establishment once buried, and subscribe if you haven't already. Because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about November 22nd, 1963. Back to that fingerprint. The story begins not in Dallas but in Austin, Texas. October 22nd, 1951, mid-afternoon, a warm Texas day. Mac Wallace, 30 years old, Marine veteran, economist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, drives his station wagon to the Butler Pitch and Putt golf course. He walks into the clubhouse. Inside is John Douglas Kinzer, a 33-year-old professional golfer who owns the miniature golf course. No one hears their conversation, but several people hear the gunshot, a single pop from a .25 caliber pistol. Witnesses see Wallace walking quickly from the scene, gun in hand. He gets into his car and drives away. 9 miles outside Austin, Texas Highway Patrol pulls him over. Wallace's license plate had been noted by a witness. He's arrested immediately. The gun is never recovered. But the evidence is overwhelming. Multiple witnesses, his license plate, Wallace caught fleeing the scene. He's charged with first-degree murder, open and shut case, death penalty case. In Texas in 1951, killing a man in cold blood meant the electric chair. But Mac Wallace doesn't panic, because Mac Wallace has friends, powerful friends. Within hours, bail is arranged. Two of Lyndon Johnson's financial supporters, Emmy Ruby and Bill Carroll, post bonds on behalf of Wallace. LBJ's personal attorney, John Cofer, agrees to represent him. The same John Cofer who represented Johnson during his stolen Senate election in 1948, tainted by allegations of massive voter fraud. The trial begins February 18, 1952. Wallace doesn't testify. His attorney admits his client's guilt, but claims it was an act of revenge. Kinzer had been sleeping with Wallace's wife. The prosecution presents 29.5 hours of testimony from 23 witnesses. But strangely, they never establish a motive. When asked why, defense attorney Polk Shelton stated they probably couldn't, because the real motive had nothing to do with Wallace's wife. John Kinzer was having an affair with Josepha Johnson, LBJ's sister. Josepha was also involved with Mac Wallace. According to multiple sources, Kinzer asked Josepha if she could arrange for her brother to loan him money. Johnson interpreted this as a blackmail threat. Josepha had told Kinzer about some of her brother's corrupt activities. Lyndon Johnson ordered the hit. Mac Wallace carried it out. On February 27, 1952, after deliberating into the evening, the jury returns with a verdict. Guilty of murder with malice aforethought. 11 jurors vote for the death penalty. 1 argues for life imprisonment. Judge Charles O. Betts overrules them all. 5-year sentence, suspended. Wallace walks free immediately. According to Bill Adler of the Texas Observer, several jurors telephoned Kinzer's parents to apologize. They said they agreed to the suspended sentence only because threats had been made against their families. Think about that. A cold-blooded murderer caught at the scene. Multiple witnesses. Convicted by a jury who wanted him executed. Walks free because Lyndon Johnson's lawyer defended him, Johnson's supporters posted bail, and the jury was threatened. The Austin Statesman wrote that this case, marked from the start to finish by the unusual, had left the people of Austin shocked and quizzical. Mac Wallace had just learned the most important lesson of his life. As long as Lyndon Johnson protected him, he could kill with impunity. 5 months after his murder conviction, Wallace was employed by Temco Inkiers of Garland, Texas. In February 1961, he was transferred to the California offices of Ling Temco Vogt, which required a background check by the U.S. Navy. Notwithstanding his first-degree murder conviction, LTV got him a security clearance. The Office of Naval Intelligence tried to revoke it for 11 years. They failed. Lyndon Johnson's protection was absolute. But Mac Wallace wasn't just a lucky murderer, he was a hitman, and the body count was growing. Henry Harvey Marshall, age 51, U.S. Department of Agriculture official, in charge of the Federal Cotton Allotment Program for the USDA Regional Office in Texas. In 1960, Marshall was asked to investigate the activities of Billy Saul Estes, a Texas conman and close friend of Lyndon Johnson. Estes was running massive fraud schemes involving non-existent fertilizer tanks and illegal cotton allotment transfers. Marshall discovered the schemes were funneling millions of dollars into LBJ's secret slush fund. Marshall refused an LBJ-arranged promotion to Washington headquarters. It became clear he was about to blow the whistle. According to testimony later given by Billy Saul Estes, Lyndon Johnson, Cliff Carter, an aide of LBJ, Mac Wallace, and Estes himself met several times to discuss the loose cannon problem. Johnson finally said, "Get rid of him." Mac Wallace was given the assignment June 3, 1961. Marshall's body is found on his family farm north of Bryan, Texas. He's been shot 5 times in the side with a .22 caliber rifle. He has a deep cut in his head, and he has a 15% carbon monoxide concentration in his lungs, County Sheriff. Howard Stegall decrees it a suicide. No pictures are taken of the crime scene. No blood samples are collected. No fingerprints are checked. Marshall's truck is washed and waxed the following day. Marshall's wife and brother refuse to believe he committed suicide. They post a $2,000 reward for information leading to a murder conviction. Texas Ranger Clint Peoples investigates and concludes it would have been utterly impossible for Mr. Marshall to have taken his own life. A gas station attendant named Nolan Griffin reports that on the day of Marshall's death, a stranger asked for directions to Marshall's farm. A Texas Ranger artist creates a facial sketch based on Griffin's description. Peoples eventually identifies the man as Mac Wallace, but the official verdict stands suicide, because Lyndon Johnson is now Vice President of the United States, and Johnson uses his influence to ensure the cover-up holds. In 1962, Billy Saul Estes is arrested on fraud charges. The scandal threatens to expose Johnson. Within months, several people connected to the case die under mysterious circumstances. George Krutelek, found slumped in his car with a hose from his exhaust stuck in the window. Coleman Wade dies when his plane crashes. Harold Orr, Ike Rogers, all dead. In December 1961, Josepha Johnson, LBJ's sister, the woman whose affair sparked the Kinzer murder, dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. Despite state law, no autopsy is conducted. By early 1963, the body count connected to Lyndon Johnson and Mac Wallace has reached at least 8 people. But Johnson has a bigger problem. He's about to be indicted on corruption charges. The Bobby Baker scandal is exploding. The Billy Saul Estes fraud investigation is closing in. Johnson faces political ruin and possible imprisonment. Then, on November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Lyndon Johnson becomes president. All investigations into his criminal activities stop immediately. Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested and charged with killing Kennedy from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. 2 days later, Oswald is murdered by Jack Ruby before he can stand trial. The Warren Commission concludes Oswald acted alone. Case closed, or so they thought. But there was a problem. On the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, investigators had lifted multiple fingerprints from the cardboard boxes that made up the so-called sniper's nest. Most were identified as Oswald's. Oswald worked in the building, so his prints made sense. But one fingerprint remained unidentified, labeled unknown, filed away in the National Archives. For 35 years, that fingerprint remained a mystery. Then, in 1998, Texas-based assassination researcher Jay Harrison had an idea. What if that unknown fingerprint belonged to Mac Wallace? Harrison obtained a certified copy of Wallace's 1951 fingerprint card from the Texas Department of Public Safety. He also obtained a TF copy of the unknown fingerprint from the National Archives. Harrison submitted both prints to A. Nathan Darby for blind analysis. Darby was a certified latent print examiner with several decades of experience. He was a member of the International Association of Identifiers. He had been head of the Austin Police Department's Identification and Criminal Records section. Texas district judges had certified him as a fingerprint expert, stating he had testified in their courts numerous times, and, with his vast experience in fingerprints, there has never been a question as to whether he could qualify to testify as an expert. Darby examined the prints. He found 14 points of match. U.S. law requires 12 points for legal identification. Darby later stated he actually found 34 points of congruence, far beyond the threshold for coincidence. On March 12, 1998, Darby signed a sworn, notarized affidavit confirming the match. The unknown fingerprint on Box A in the sniper's nest belonged to Malcolm Wallace. Walt Brown held a press conference in Dallas in May 1998. The findings were forwarded to the Dallas Police Department, who passed them to the FBI. Copies went to the Assassination Records Review Board, the federal panel created to oversee the identification and release of JFK assassination records. The implications were staggering. Mac Wallace, a convicted murderer, Lyndon Johnson's personal hitman, had left his fingerprint on a box in the sniper's nest. According to forensic experts, fingerprints can only be taken from cardboard within 24 hours of origin. Wallace had been there on November 22, 1963. The day Kennedy died. But the media ignored it. The mainstream press wouldn't touch the story. The History Channel eventually aired a documentary featuring the fingerprint evidence in 2003 as part of their series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy. The episode was called The Guilty Men. It was immediately banned from further rebroadcasts after being attacked by Johnson's former associates. Why? Because the evidence didn't just implicate Wallace, it implicated Lyndon Baines Johnson. Multiple eyewitnesses described seeing a man on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository who didn't match Oswald's description. Arnold Rowland saw two men on the 6th floor, one holding a rifle, minutes before shots rang out. Carolyn Walther saw two men at a window, one in a brown suit coat, the other in a white shirt holding a rifle. The man in the brown suit was heavyset, wore glasses. That description matches Mac Wallace perfectly. In '94, Billy Saul Estes testified before a grand jury. He told them Lyndon Johnson, Cliff Carter, Mac Wallace, and himself had been involved in multiple murders, including Henry Marshall, Josepha Johnson, John Kinzer, and John F. Kennedy. Estes stated that LBJ ordered these killings and transmitted his orders through Cliff Carter to Mac Wallace, who executed the murders. The grand jury changed Henry Marshall's death certificate from suicide to homicide, but no charges were filed. Johnson, Carter, and Wallace were all dead by then. Wallace died January 7, 1971, in a single car accident near Pittsburgh, Texas. He appeared to have fallen asleep at the wheel. But according to Barr McClellan, author of Blood, Money, and Power, How LBJ Killed JFK, Wallace had to be eliminated. After driving to see his daughter, Wallace went to an office in Longview, Texas, where his car's exhaust was allegedly rigged to flow into the vehicle. Wallace died of massive head injuries. Cliff Carter died later that same year, 1971, at age 53. Both men dead within months of each other. Billy Saul Estes was scheduled to be released from prison in 1971. Texas Ranger Clint Peoples had documented evidence that Wallace was one of the shooters in Dealey Plaza. On June 19, 1992, Peoples told a friend about this evidence. 4 days later, on June 23rd, Peoples was killed in a mysterious one-car automobile accident. The pattern is clear. Anyone who knew too much about Mac Wallace and Lyndon Johnson ended up dead. Let's be clear about what the evidence shows. Mac Wallace was a convicted first-degree murderer who walked free because Lyndon Johnson intervened. Wallace killed multiple people on Johnson's orders. The body count includes at least 8 murders. Wallace's fingerprint was found in the sniper's nest on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository on November 22, 1963. Eyewitnesses described a man matching Wallace's description on the 6th floor. And everyone who tried to expose this information died under suspicious circumstances. Did Lyndon Johnson order the assassination of John F. Kennedy? The fingerprint evidence doesn't prove it conclusively, but it proves Mac Wallace was there, and Mac Wallace didn't do anything without Lyndon Johnson's orders. Critics of the Wallace fingerprint match argue that Darby's analysis has been disputed by other experts. Some claim the prints don't match, pointing to inconsistencies. But Darby's credentials were impeccable. He testified as an expert in Texas courts for decades. He had 75 years of combined fingerprint experience with another FBI examiner who reviewed his work. And Darby didn't just find 14 matching points, he found 34. Could Darby have been wrong? Possibly. Fingerprint analysis is not infallible, but consider the alternative. If Wallace's print wasn't on that box, how do we explain everything else? The murders, the connections, the timing, the witness descriptions, the suspicious deaths of everyone who knew the truth. The establishment wants you to believe Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, that a 24-year-old former Marine with mediocre marksmanship skills pulled off the perfect assassination from a 6th-floor window with a mail-order rifle. That Jack Ruby, a 2-bit nightclub owner with no political agenda, spontaneously decided to murder Oswald on live television out of sympathy for Jackie Kennedy. They want you to believe Mac Wallace's fingerprint in the sniper's nest is a coincidence, that all the murders connected to LBJ and Wallace are coincidences, that the threats against jurors, the suspended sentence, the security clearance for a convicted murderer, the mysterious car accidents, all coincidences. How many coincidences does it take before a pattern emerges? Lyndon Johnson became president at 2:38 p.m. on November 22, 1963, aboard Air Force One. He was sworn in with Jackie Kennedy standing beside him, still wearing the blood-stained pink suit. The investigations into Johnson's corruption ended that day. The Bobby Baker scandal disappeared. The Billy Saul Estes fraud prosecutions were dropped. Johnson went on to pass landmark civil rights legislation and expand the Vietnam War. He chose not to run for re-election in 1968 and died in 1973. Mac Wallace's fingerprint remains in the National Archives. Box A from the sniper's nest is stored as evidence. The 14-point match is documented in a sworn affidavit. These are facts. The question isn't whether Mac Wallace's print was found in the sniper's nest. It was. The question is, what was LBJ's personal hitman doing on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository on the day John F. Kennedy was assassinated? If this story made you question the official narrative, do something powerful. Hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube this history deserves to reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the conspiracies that shaped America. Every day, we uncover evidence buried in declassified documents, sworn affidavits, and sealed testimony. Stories of murder, political power, and the assassinations that changed history. True crime, true power, true history. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us, do you believe Mac Wallace's fingerprint proves LBJ's involvement in the JFK assassination? Or is this just another conspiracy theory with no substance? Are you in the US, Europe, Middle East, Asia? Our community spans the globe and your voice matters. Share your thoughts, share your city, keep this conversation alive, because uncomfortable truths don't stay buried forever, and the fingerprint doesn't lie. Thank you for watching, and remember, history doesn't repeat, but it sure as hell rhymes. Only by facing the truth can we prevent it from happening again. The Hitman's Fingerprint, Box A, November 22, 1963. The evidence is there. The question is, are you ready to believe it?